In a blog post regarding the RAM consumption exploit, Dan Larimer says, "I believe that the intent of the code, as understood by the users and developers, should be enforced. If a malicious contract is clearly taking advantage of a mismatch between the intent of the users and the actual effect of the code, then block producers have the ability to blacklist the malicious contract while a dispute is arbitrated between the author of the malicious contract and those who interacted with it." Welcome to EOS Weekly, your #1 source of EOS news. Today is Thursday, August 30th, and the title of this week's episode is Post-Mortem on the RAM Jam. So let's get into this week's update, starting with headlines. On August 28th, Dan Larimer released a blog post titled Preventing Unexpected RAM Consumption. We're going to get into this, but first we need to take a step back and look at what happened that triggered the Bytemaster to write this blog post in the first place. EOS Canada, one of the top-ranked block producers, put out a post on August 24th that gives us the timeline of events. So we're going to start there. So what happened? Well, somewhere around August 18th or 19th, a bad actor exploited a vulnerability in a system contract, which enabled this bad actor to fill people's RAM with random data, and then there was no way to free up this RAM. The victims were accounts that had interacted with these malicious contracts. No tokens were lost nor stolen, but still any dApp accounts that need RAM to operate were disrupted, and some went down temporarily while they found a workaround. What happened next is someone reported this to block.one through the bug bounty program, likely one of the accounts impacted by the exploit. The bug bounty program enables people who uncover bugs or security flaws like this one to collect up to $10,000 for their finding. block.one then began working on a fix for this issue. They did this quietly because when you find these kind of issues, you can't publicize it until after it's been fixed. Otherwise, more attackers could exploit the vulnerability. block.one notified the block producers of this for the first time on August 20th, and over the next 2 days, block.one worked with the block producers to test and iterate on EOS.io patches. And the third patch, patch 3, was deployed to the EOS mainnet on August 22nd. EOS Canada put out this blog post on August 24th, 2 days after the patch went out, which, as far as we can tell, is the first time the community really found out about all this. And 4 days later, on August 28th, Dan Larimer put out this blog post where he gave us a nice narrative around what happened and showed how the governance of the EOS blockchain served us well in arriving at a quick resolution. The block producers froze the malicious contract, and it's going to remain frozen until a dispute is arbitrated between the author of the malicious contract and those who interacted with it. Once arbitration determines the intent of code, the code will be updated to free up the unexpectedly consumed RAM and prevent this from happening again. So all in all, this was a great example of governance at work, demonstrating to the world the value of the governed blockchain, that is EOS. That's the message we need to send out to the rest of the world. But just between us hardcore EOS fans, let's take a look at this from a few more angles. And first off, before we go into the discussion, we're going to start referring to this, instead of the RAM consumption exploit, we're going to refer to this as the RAM jam, because RAM jam is easier to say and it's catchier than saying RAM consumption exploit every time. So now that we've got a nice name for it, here's the deal. This RAM jam was an absolute gift to the EOS community. What we have here is a case study, a great example going through the entire life cycle of a misbehaving contract. And for a $5.3 billion project, nothing that bad happened here. So we have an example to learn from, and yet no permanent damage was done to EOS token holders nor to EOS's reputation as a whole. So what can we learn from the RAM jam? To start with, we have the Constitution. This RAM jam scenario couldn't have come at a better time, as the Alliance is just getting started with their Constitution drafting sessions, which will be going on for the next 11 weeks. So Alliance, if you're listening, don't let this RAM jam opportunity go to waste. You were just handed the perfect real-world use case to discuss what could be made more clear through the Constitution. For example, was there any confusion on the part of the block producers as to whether they had authority to freeze the malicious contract? Was the intent of code clearly articulated somewhere, like in a Ricardian contract? Did we need ECAF to make a ruling before the block producers took any action? And what happens to the accounts of the malicious actors? This is an absolute goldmine for us to draw from when drafting the Constitution. The Constitution should make it abundantly clear how much power arbitration has and how much power the block producers have. It should make it clear when block producers can just act and when they need to wait for a ruling before acting. I wonder if there was any confusion among the block producers during this, or if they were all crystal clear the whole time. We'd need the block producers to fill us in, but I would be willing to bet that there was at least some confusion mixed in there. A well-written constitution would have been an asset to the block producers to reference and ensure they were acting according to the community's terms. Moving on, what else can we learn from the RAM jam situation besides clarifying roles and authority in the Constitution? If we were to do a post-mortem and look at the root cause and discuss how we could prevent this type of issue or worse issues going forward, what might we want to tweak? How about the bug bounty program that maxes out at $10,000? Is this enough of an award for finding security flaws in a $5.3 billion project? Clearly, the bug bounty didn't work in the RAM jam case. The malicious actor moved forward with the exploit. The goal of the bounty program is to have the incentives high enough that people report the vulnerability and claim the reward. The fact that the vulnerability was maliciously exploited means the attacker wasn't enticed by the bounty. It wasn't interesting enough. It was more fun to jam up people's RAM than it was to go on a $10,000 shopping spree. It must have been the victims of the attack who collected the bounty. This isn't how we want this to work. We want the bounty incentives high enough that if a hacker finds a vulnerability, they'd rather take the reward than exploit it. Or better yet, make the bug bounty so high that we get an army of ethical hackers pounding away on EOSIO day and night. We want the ethical teams to find and collect rewards before the bad actors have a chance to. To put it bluntly, $10,000 is laughably low for a $5.3 billion project. We aren't in the garage stage anymore. So here's where we need to be. We need to have bounty payouts in the vicinity of $1 to $10 million on the upper end. Is this unheard of in the bug bounty world? Maybe. But we're not building a typical project here. This is EOS, and we need to set a new precedent in the bug bounty world. $1 to $10 million might just be enough that if a hacker did find a vulnerability going forward, that they might share it with us in a benevolent way instead of exploiting the vulnerability. A $1 to $10 million bounty might be enough to get universities and private organizations motivated to try their hand at some ethical hacking on the EOSIO codebase. Imagine the positive press we get in showing the world how serious we are about security. Plus the recruitment side. Imagine teams of university students all studying EOSIO blockchain code with the hopes of striking it rich. These could become future recruits for block.one or whoever is managing the code in the future. As it stands right now, with a $10,000 reward, the bad actor who found the RAM jam exploit was more interested in jamming up people's RAM for fun instead of cashing in on the bounty. If the bad actor could have earned, say, $1 to $10 million for reporting the RAM jam exploit, would he or she have moved forward with the malicious activity? Now, we can ask block.one to foot the bill for millions of dollars in bug bounty payments, potentially, but it might be too much. They probably wouldn't want to pay this. But that is why we need something like the worker proposal system, or some alternative version of it, because with the worker proposal system, we, the EOS community, can manage these types of programs outside the control of block.one, in a decentralized way, ideally. Now, we're going to move on to dApp news, but as you'll see, we're not quite done with this RAM jam issue just yet. So, in dApp news, EOS Bet has been center stage this past week. They are topping the charts in terms of number of transactions, not just in terms of EOS dApps, but really of any dApp across any blockchain. In one of their tweets, EOS Bet said they now process more transactions than all the applications on Ethereum combined. EOS Bet is currently a simple dice rolling game that lets you wager EOS and gain or lose EOS depending on if you win or lose. But this is just an early version of what they plan to offer. Interestingly, EOS Bet was one of the accounts impacted by the RAM jam issue we just talked about. They put out this blog post where they described finding a workaround but are still working on a long-term fix. We don't know yet how prevalent the RAM jam issue was, but the fact that it's impacting our most used dApp should concern us all. This exploit might have been more prevalent than most of us realize. Chintai was supposed to launch today, August 28th, but they are delayed. We don't have a new target date yet. In a tweet they sent out yesterday on August 27th, Chintai said, "Recent updates to RAM have caused issues relating to airdrops and order creation on Chintai. We apologize for the delay, but now have solutions to these issues and the team is working around the clock to fix them." Is this the same RAM jam issue surfacing yet again, impacting Chintai and delaying their launch? We asked Chintai this over Twitter, but we haven't gotten an answer yet. Some good news is that we have EOS continuing to spread into exchanges. The latest is Canada's NDAX exchange, which just yesterday started supporting EOS trading with the CAD, the Canadian dollar. So it's great to see EOS tokens continue to get support across all the major exchanges. And that brings us to events. The London Hackathon is on September 22nd and 23rd. This is the one to be excited about because of the big announcements coming from Mr. Larimer and block.one, which we've covered in past episodes. And then we have on November 10th and 11th, the hackathon in San Francisco, and likely another hackathon coming in December, but the dates and the locations have not been announced on this December one just yet. And then we have January 21st through the 25th, EOS DevCon in Tampa, Florida, which is a dApp and EOS developer-focused event. If there's any other upcoming events that you want to promote, please ping us on Twitter so we can add them to our future episodes. Our Twitter handle is @EOSWeekly. And that brings us to our featured EOS project of the week. So, as we all know, there's debates going on in terms of how arbitration fits in with the EOS ecosystem. How much power does ECAF have, and when they do make a ruling, how are those rulings enforced? But there's a concept called bonds that makes a lot of sense in terms of something that bridges the gap between the block producers and arbitration. The way you can think of bonds is in terms of promises and money on the table. I say I'm going to do something and I put a $100 bill on the table. If I don't do what I said, then that $100 is yours. For example, let's say I'm building a dApp, to give us more of a real world example. Let's say I'm building a dApp where I'm connecting drivers with people who need a ride to the airport. Now, a ride to the airport is time sensitive in that if someone schedules a car to be there to pick them up at a certain time, if that car isn't there, the person risks missing their flight, right? So if I were designing an app like this, I might want to make a promise to the users that a car will be there to drive them to the airport within 5 minutes of the scheduled pickup time. Otherwise, we will pay you $100 for the inconvenience. Having a guarantee like this might be a differentiating aspect of my dApp. Bonds would make this kind of transaction simple. The drivers would have $100 set aside as collateral, sort of like escrow. And if they're more than 5 minutes late, that money, the bond, gets transferred to the user who is impacted by missing their ride. Now, most of the time, this will happen automatically without getting arbitration involved. But let's say that there was a case where the driver disputes the fact that he was there 5 minutes late, more than 5 minutes late. He claims he was there on time, so shouldn't have to give the $100 bond. Then this would go to arbitration. Arbitration looks at the evidence. Let's say there's a time-stamped picture of the empty driveway, and arbitration rules in favor of the rider. Arbitration now has the power to transfer the $100 worth of tokens from driver to rider, and they do all this without the need to ask the block producers to intervene. Do you see the power in this? Bonds could just become the dominant form of arbitration on the EOS blockchain, and that's why we're featuring Project Tungsten by EOS Metal as this week's EOS project of the week. Now, it's still the early days for Project Tungsten. EOS Metal just announced this yesterday in a blog post, and this is still in the proof of concept stage. But this makes so much sense at the conceptual level that we wanted to draw some attention to this project here. The bond concept as a way to bridge the gap between block producers and arbitration was first put forth by Dan Larimer himself, as EOS Metal noted in their blog post. And while the example we gave with the driver and the rider is a small, straightforward example, with a $100 bond, this could be applied to much larger promises and much larger bond amounts attached to those promises. Imagine this being used in dApps for commercial real estate deals, for example, or in the realm of insurance dApps. Another way this could be used is in account protection. In their blog post, EOS Metal quoted Dan Larimer again, this time from his Intent of Code is Law blog post, when he described how EOS token holders could opt into what he calls a banking Ricardian contract, which would be a way to enforce arbitration orders in the event of a key theft. In a way, this is like being able to opt in to base layer arbitration in order to bring the human aspect into your account protection. And yet this could be done on an account-by-account basis depending on the needs of the token holder. Project Tungsten could be the solution to many of these issues that the community has been debating around arbitration. We'll be following this project closely and reporting on it in future episodes. In the meantime, please read the blog post they put out on Tungsten. The link is in the show notes below. Congratulations to EOS Metal and their Tungsten project for being featured this week's EOS Project of the Week. If you would like to nominate a great EOS project to be recognized here, please ping us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EOSWeekly. That's it for this week's episode of EOS Weekly. Please like and subscribe if you found this content informative and you want to continue to stay current on EOS as this revolution unfolds. Thanks, and we'll see you next week right here on EOS Weekly.